Hi everyone, I'm Doug Mealy from the Same Kit Different Day podcast, and I've got Sophie King here today as our guest. How are you, Sophie?
I'm good, thanks, Doug. Not too bad at all. How are you?
Yeah, great, not bad at all. Locked down still, but hoping for a return to normal. So, for the benefit of our listeners, Sophie, if you could tell us what your job role is now and sort of a little bit about your background, I think that would help them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, basically, I'm physical interventions lead for the acute trust that I work at, and I've been doing this role for coming up to 2 years actually now, 2 years exactly.
Yeah.
And I initially started the role by myself, which to begin with was fine. And what I was really focusing on was the training of staff to obviously be able to safely manage patients' challenging behaviours, safely for the staff and safely for the patient.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, really, we were doing nothing. And I became initially really interested in sort of the physical interventions and challenging behaviour side of things when I was an operating department practitioner in our children and young people's theatres here at the hospital. And we would see lots of patients, adolescents, even young children coming in. They may have challenging behaviours. They may just be scared, which even adults are scared going in to have an operation.
Yep.
And sometimes we would have to restrain the patient in the anaesthetic room for an induction of anaesthesia because they were too frightened to have a cannula for the anaesthetic to kick in. And often mum or dad who was going to help us is now not able to help because they're too distraught or they've walked out of the anaesthetic room. So we would have to restrain patients really because they were by that point halfway through an induction of anaesthesia. We couldn't stop for the patient's safety. We had to carry on.
Yeah.
And then the same patients, because I used to work both in anaesthetics and recovery, would wake up following their operation that they just had and often be very confused or trying to get off their trolley, which clearly, if they just had a major operation, would not be safe for them to do.
No.
So we were having to sort of restrain patients as well in recovery. And I always used to think to myself, Doug, well, am I doing this the right way?
Yeah.
Is there an actual technique or techniques that we should be using? And what are the warning signs? Could we have preempted any of this in any way?
Yeah.
And how do we communicate what we've done to the parents or the carers of this young person, or indeed the young person afterwards? And who do I talk to about this? Because I'm not sure, and I don't feel right about it.
It's taboo, isn't it? It's a very taboo subject.
It's when I started looking into it, nobody really wanted to talk about it, even in the trust. And then I got to become paediatric clinical educator for acute paediatrics on level 12, so I kind of left theatres behind me.
Yeah.
That was in about 2013, and I, naively, Doug, thought I'm going to leave all those issues about restraint behind me. I don't have to worry about that anymore. How wrong could I be? With some of the challenging young people that become inpatients for various reasons. And again, I was looking around me thinking, well, these poor nursing staff are trying to keep this patient safe and themselves safe and other patients safe, and they don't know what to do.
No.
So it was a bit like lifting the lid off Pandora's box and realizing that we didn't really have any provision. And I knew that once I lifted that lid off, I had a choice. I could either stick the lid back on or actually delve into that box and really start to try and do something. And I guess it took a long time to get the role of physical interventions lead set up. So that was April 2018. I got into post, so I applied for it, and I got the job. And then it's taken another year and a half, really, 2 years to get a training team. So technically, I was teaching a lot of people on my own. But now we've got that team in place, the next element of the service is not just about training. It's about trying to reflect from incidents to sort of make changes. Because if you don't do that, then you're never going to actually reduce restraint. or manage it in a better way or a different way. And that's really what, in this absence of actually being able to do hands-on training or much hands-on training at the moment because of the COVID situation, we've actually really been afforded that opportunity to support staff more in their clinical areas and really analyse a bit more what's going on with the patients, what else could we do to try and address those challenging behaviours and stop them before they stop that cycle. So on the one hand, a positive for COVID has been that we've been allowed to do that. And that's very much a side of the service that I see developing even more and more. If not, it's more important in a way than the training, the actual practical training. And moving forward, it will be about trying to find that balance between the training part of the service and the supporting staff clinically part of the service. So it's been exciting because it's strangely allowed us to move much more quickly with that part of the service. Although when we resume, hopefully, our normal training, or it will never be normal as it was pre-COVID, but our regular training offering, which I'm hoping will be in September, so staff can get on their initial and refresher training. We're going to have an interesting juggling act between those two parts of the service, because I think staff will get used to us being available, and rightly we should be, but it's how we manage that moving forward.
Especially when you go back to Monday to Friday teaching all day, and they want you for that conference call at lunchtime.
I know.
But might we see services expand, new roles creating for someone as a go-between, perhaps?
I don't know. I mean, what's abundantly clear to me is the links between us and our safeguarding team.
Yes.
And I don't just mean it's about spotting patients who should be had a DOLS application and a best interest form done and they haven't, because there is a bit of that involved as well, obviously. It's just raising concerns about, we've got this patient here, and the ward staff are talking about transferring this patient, for example, to Manchester, which is where he might come from. And they're talking about he might need some kind of restraining therapy to get him safely there. Well, actually, that's a lot to think about, isn't it? Because because the DOLS paperwork they're under won't cover them potentially for that transfer. How are we going to do that transfer? What type of vehicle and what type of staff will that entail? What type of restraining therapies are we talking about here? So then we link into our mental capacity lead. Then we might need to link into the complex discharge team. There's so much. The more we look at this, the bigger this is, and we're still learning. We're still an evolving service. But I'm excited about. I feel really positive about what we've been able to achieve, even though we haven't really been able to do much teaching. We are offering some shorter sessions for staff that are working with challenging patients who are new. I think they've never had any kind of training before, but we're limiting it to 4 hours face-to-face, and we will be using surgical masks for the hands-on element, and gel and washing of hands pre and post. So we're being really, really careful. We're only doing groups of 4 candidates at any one time to try and maximize on social distancing in between the actual hands-on elements. So we're doing what we can, and I think moving forward, when we get our training properly, hopefully up and running again as of September, our standard sessions, I think a lot of the stuff that was the discussion around the risks of restraint, how we can reduce restraint, the governance around restraint, our own policies around restraint, that will be probably a pre-e-learning candidate package with an assessment that they'll have to do before they come on the training, so that we can keep that training just to the practical elements. And I think the most important thing is, the thing that I'm most worried about is that we'll miss the discussion of scenario elements of actual incidents, which with candidates, both candidates and trainers learn from that in the classroom environment. But if we can offset not doing that in the training by actually attending clinically more and offering more debriefs clinically, then hopefully we can go some way to bridging that gap.
Yeah, I think
And I
so.
think it's,
We've
yeah,
found that by putting a lot of our modules online, we published DVDs a few years ago. So as soon as the lockdown happened, I just thought, well, let's take these DVDs with some great different materials in, implement them into an online course, and then we can go from there. And from an audit point of view, it's actually better because people can listen to me do a conference, they can listen to me do a talk. There isn't always that guarantee that they've retained that knowledge. They might have it there in front of them and be able to read off a whiteboard and put it down into the reflective learning log. So the positive for me is there's an actual record there to show people have answered these questions. And it's
yeah,
not the kind of questions you can Google about physical intervention, as I'm sure you appreciate. There's
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
mixed stuff out there. You've got to actually watch them. So from our point of view, it was good. The instructional clips we put out there, which we use to support people anyway, we can see if people have watched them and looked at them. But I do agree there are things missing. We've got an option where people can chat and ask questions and things, and I've been answering a lot of emails, but you can't beat that in classroom discussion with everybody sort of giving their own personal anecdotes,
yeah,
can you?
exactly. And to me, that's such an important part of candidate, and as I say, trainer learning. We learn from the incidents as well.
Yeah,
We have over 1,000 beds in our trust. And most often pre-COVID, they were certainly always all full. With
yeah,
lots of challenging patient groups for lots of different reasons. And every day it's a new incident, or it's an incident that we can learn from. So we have to capture that. But you're quite right. I've always wondered about how to measure candidates' understanding of some of the things that we're talking about around risk,
yeah,
guidance, governance, that kind of thing. And doing that pre-course e-learning package will lend itself to that assessed element really, really well. And for the restraint training, we're going to augment that e-learning package with videos of our
yes,
actual, if you like, the four most frequently used
yeah, great,
restraint techniques that we use in this trust, so
yeah,
that candidates can look at those videos before they come to the training, so that
that's
hopefully
right.
they've got a rough idea. Oh, okay, this is vaguely what it's going to look like. It's not to replace hands-on training. I would
No,
never
not at all.
advocate that. We need it. Because otherwise it'd be like learning, I don't know, a really complicated dance, wouldn't it, Doug? Just by watching a video and
Yeah,
not having any face-to-face instruction and hoping that that's it, which
yeah,
it,
exactly.
it can never be. Um, Certainly, I hope it will never be. I think the hands-on practical element is so important. Um,
Yeah,
and you can always have a very brief discussion with candidates. They might raise something, and you might be able to say, well, we can't address that now, but give me your email, and we can
yes,
email you outside of this and come find you.
yeah,
So it lends itself to lots of other options anyway.
yeah,
So
it does.
I don't look at it necessarily as a negative. It's just about thinking about new ways of delivering, isn't it?
It's just managing what's going on at the present time. I mean, people keep saying about it being unprecedented times, which is a saying I sort of don't like now. But I remember things like the petrol strike. I remember when there was a petrol strike, and at the time, I think it was the late 90s, and I had a martial arts business, and we used to travel around to different places. So we had to sort
Right.
of try and manage that, and it was back before the days of communications online and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So we are going to rise out of this and have things in place. I think there'll be a lot more use of online. I'm hoping there'll be a lot less unnecessary meetings because we've actually proved that we all don't need to be there for some of the things we're talking about. But yeah, the face-to-face training has got to go back. One thing I did want to talk to you about, I know a few people have put things out there talking about how we shouldn't be doing training, and I'm sort of one of
Mm-mm.
them that's locked myself down and stopped training, mainly because I'd be classed as a super spreader because of the traveling, the places I
Yeah.
go and the travel I
I
do,
do get
which
it. I do get it.
yeah, but I think that the in-house teams like yourselves, as with the police training that's been resuming, we aren't in full lockdown. It's not as if the military took over the streets. It's not as if the
Mm.
supermarkets we had military handing rations out to people. It was kind of a graded response. We did have an
Mm.
instant lockdown where everyone was told not to, but a lot of people have had to go on. Mental health services have had to go on. Hospitals have had to go on.
Mm.
And if you're in a vehicle with someone double crewed, like a police officer, or you're working in a hospital where it's impossible to social distance, I do understand how a risk assessment can say, well, yeah, we're going to carry on with our training, as you say, in small groups with the
Yeah,
necessary
absolutely.
measures in place.
Yeah.
And I think it has to, doesn't it?
Well, look, I'm not being funny, Doug, but unless somebody can wave a magic wand and
Yeah,
we don't have any challenging patients,
yeah,
but that's not going to happen. And the majority of our challenging patients, it's clinically driven. You
yes,
know, we're not talking about behaviourally driven; it's clinically driven. Um, and people are feeling more vulnerable, either adults or young people now, more than ever. And I think a lot more of those challenging behaviours are going to perhaps manifest themselves. I
yeah,
think that, if we look at just some stuff that's going on in communities, tensions may be running higher in between family groups. People are all stuck indoors together for long periods of time. These tensions aren't going to go away. And it's really interesting. We have got to collectively come up with a long-term solution or response to how we can move forward, because people keep saying these are unprecedented times. I hear it almost every day, Doug, but
yep,
you know what? It's not unprecedented anymore, is it?
no,
I
that's
think
right.
I think this is kind of a new way that we have to think of being,
Yeah,
and I don't think we can all just now keep the shutters up and just think, well, we'll just wait for this to go away, because I'm not sure exactly when that will be.
no, or what it looks like, or what
Yeah,
it'll look
what
like
that
when
will
it's
look
gone.
like. Yeah,
Yeah,
how exactly will that look like? And I also think of, a lot of people have sadly died because of COVID, and probably still will. And I think, if nothing else, we can seize on this opportunity maybe to make some real positive changes. It's given the world a chance to step off that treadmill and think about some of those massively bigger issues, like our ozone layer and unnecessary travel and all of these things. And so I hope we do learn, Doug, to pick up on your previous point. I really hope we do. I hope we can make some fundamental changes on that macro level.
yeah. Now we've seen a rise in the demand for soft restraint equipment, and
Yeah,
as always, we don't.
I noticed that on your site. Yeah.
Yeah, which has been a real challenge, because we've stopped all face to face training, and then we've had people saying we need kit. So we've done a lot of stuff over Zoom, and we offer the kit with training, mainly to prevent reputational risks, so people don't go out there and
Mm,
use it, and because we
mm,
feel we've got a moral obligation. Now legally,
mm,
we could just charge more and sort of chuck it out there. So we've put together sort of clips to assist people, especially for our overseas clients, because we had an order of 150 kits from a correctional facility. Now there's no way I could let those go without any kind of assessment or training criteria. So the online stuff has really helped us, and it's enabled people to ask questions. And as you said before, if people turn up, and we don't tend to teach physical intervention skills first, we tend to do the behaviour stuff, the
yeah,
conflict
of course.
resolution,
Yeah.
yeah, and then maybe day three we do it. But there's a lot of people. Let's take teachers for example. A lot of people that go into a job with no kind of training, and then they
Mm,
don't get the restraint training until September. Now, I'm not suggesting that these people learn kind of like you're learning the guitar from a book, but if they saw some of this is what you must never do, and these
yeah.
are some of the recommended holds,
Yeah.
surely that stands them in a better stead for managing an emergency before they get the training.
I actually do completely agree. I've been very resistant, Doug, to doing videos or even
Yeah.
photographs of some of the techniques, because I'm always a bit worried that people will then assume that means they don't need to do the training,
Yes,
which
same with our
clearly,
kit. Yeah,
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 it's not the case, clearly.
yeah,
But we are going to use videos as pre-learning to augment, to support the fact that we're doing much shorter face-to-face. Um,
yeah,
but also we're working on the photographic standard operating procedure for our sort of top four restraint holds, which really is just going to be an aid memoir for staff who've already been trained, Or it might be that somebody's thinking, oh my gosh, I notice staff are having to do that a lot here and I can't access training right at this moment. Let me just have a look at the key principles and the photographs here.
That's right.
But it's not to replace face-to-face training, but it's to assist and to support in these times when it's not quite so readily available.
No. Now, we first started talking, I think it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Because you had some problems that you were looking to manage, or some challenges you're looking to manage around combative people when they're coming round from sedation. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to, Doug, is when I very first got the job of physical interventions lead in 2018, we had a number of suddenly extremely challenging patients in our ICU.
Yes.
And these are predominantly head injury patients.
Yeah.
The three that we had all in at one time around May and June of that specific year were all young.
Yes.
Some of them may have already had challenging behaviours anyway, maybe, for example, autism or ADHD. They were all head injury. And although I would suggest probably about 80% of patients, when they're coming off ventilation and sedation, could wake up with sort of challenging behaviours, because it's sort of like emergence delirium, agitated delirium.
Right.
But they're confused anyway, and that could be because of the anaesthetic agents, the sedation agents, other medications, all sorts of things could be in the mix there. Most of them, one can manage them,
Yes.
but there's a very small percentage that we were really struggling to manage, and in terms of them trying to hurt themselves by pulling out life-preserving safety critical and dwelling devices.
Yeah.
And sort of within that, sort of very uncoordinated lashing out and trying to hurt other staff members. Sometimes we don't even think the patient necessarily knew what they were doing. It was this whole confused agitation that was going on. And it was really, really difficult, because some of these patients, it's not so simple as just resedating them.
No.
Because actually they've got a head injury, and we need to assess their neurological function. So to keep on sedating them, to keep them and others safe, was almost slowing up, potentially, could slow up their recovery process. It could delay it.
There was also some talk about some people being immune to sedation. Is that the correct term? Does that happen?
Yeah, yes, it can happen. So there was certainly one or two of these patients who, no matter how much sedation we were trying to give them, it was really having very little effects. Even mixing sedations, trying different combinations, and there could be lots of reasons for that. But we are talking about, if you imagine maybe, if you were just to imagine our ICU, I don't know, had somewhere between 1,000 to 1,200 patients in a given year. Okay. We're talking about maybe 4 to 6 patients. So we're talking about a tiny amount of patients that kind of fall into this high challenging category that would be contraindicated to keep them sedated for long periods of time for their own recovery. But we had to find a safe way of trying to manage this, and it wasn't just even sort of physical restraint. So chemical restraint may be inappropriate or not working. Physical restraint was like sort of not even safe necessarily for the patient or the staff. There was still, it was exhausting.
It's prolonged as well, and you need so many members of staff for it. Yeah.
It was prolonged. Everybody was exhausted by it, and I think the longer a physical restraint goes on for in any singular episode, the more at risk of harm there is, isn't there, for the patient and the staff involved.
I attended a conference once, and they said that the amount of time that someone is held for is almost more important than the actual position they're held in. Because we can all talk about a safe position of restraint, but for how long? Once you lie in the same position and you get pins and needles. So if you're being held struggling in one position, surely that increases the risk.
But, I know from personal experience of having to restrain patients or being in situations where I've needed to be part of a team restraining a patient.
Yeah.
But the longer it goes on for, wow, I know it the next day. Never mind the patient, you know.
Yeah.
I certainly know it the next day. So it was thinking about all of the variables, and it was also thinking about, we talk about proportionality a lot, don't we, in our world? And dignity, proportionality, anxiety levels for that patient and the staff. You know, what's more proportionate, what's safer? So we went on this journey, and I don't just mean me. I mean, this was the lead consultant for ICU. He was pivotal in this. I mean, the clinical educator team in ICU, and I mean the matron for ICU. So this was like a multidisciplinary team approach, really, to trying to find a solution to protect the patient and to protect staff from these prolonged restraint episodes. And as much as I don't even like the term mechanical restraint. It kind of, you know, it sounds a bit antiquated to me, and
Tars everything with the same brush.
Not necessarily forward thinking. But I was coming more and more to the conclusion that maybe this was the way we needed to think. And we reached out to some providers, some suppliers of restraining devices, and we had a number of different suppliers come in to talk about their devices and the pros and cons, and nothing seemed appropriate.
No, that's right.
Nothing at all. And then I think, and I don't think you should mind me saying, General Service Association, my senior tutor, Jo Colson French, she gave me your name.
Yeah.
And she said, try Doug. I think he's got some kind of system that might help. And that's where you and I got in touch, and you came down and you did this session. You showed us about the safe holding system, as we call it. We call it the safe holding system.
That's right. Yeah, that's correct.
And we thought, wow, this could be it. This could be what we need. And I think, I'm just trying to remember, I think you came down February or March of 2019 to show us that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
well, I remember it because I remember coming down, and I remember walking through the ICU ward with a story in every bed, and then I remember coming down to a side room, and we did the presentation in a sort of a side room down there.
That's right.
And it was a real eye opener, because I hear about it, and then I see on paper and say, okay, well, this day text says this has happened, but when you're actually there, you can feel it, you can visualize it, I can see the bed space, and I can see the machinery that they'd be sort of crocodile rolling off the bed with. So it was quite an eye opener for me, being able to come into that environment as well.
Well, to me, it's anybody can read an incident form and say, oh, well, why didn't they do that? What about that? And unless you see that space and you see it through the eyes of the people concerned, you can't really understand what happened, or what their thought processes were, or what the obstacles were, and the hindrances and the risks at that moment in time. So I like to visit clinical areas, and where possible, and it's very few and far between, but ICU is one such area, we will teach in their clinical environment. So ICU and children's theatres, we teach in their clinical environment, so that staff can get the real feel for how it might work in their working environment, and what the pitfalls or obstacles might be, and what they need to consider. But so you came down, I reckon it was February, March of 2019, and the consultant concerned, the matron, the clinical educators, and the staff that we got to look at that were very excited that this could be a potential option for us. And Doug, from that moment on until the end of 2019, so from March through to December, we went through a very strict, I guess you'd call it, governance process.
That's right, yeah.
And consultation process to try and move forward with this. So I took it to the Physical Interventions Governance meeting. It went to the Safeguarding Steering Group. Various papers were written. We wrote a standard operating procedure just about the use of this safe holding system for ICU.
Yeah.
And I've got the document in front of me, actually. It's a very meaty SOP. It goes, it's 31 pages.
Yeah.
And we have a very strict protocol about how to use this. It can only ever be used on this cohort of patients in ICU.
Right.
And it has to be risk assessed, and it has to be prescribed by the consultant. But there's no getting around that. We can't just suddenly decide willy-nilly that we want to use this system. It's in the nursing care plan, but if it's used, they have to do regular observations on skin integrity, breathing, all of the key things that we would want to check. So there's lots of processes in place to safely manage this. And it's one of those weird things, Doug. We got it in, and we got it all past all of our governance and accepted, and there's protocols and SOPs in place. And it was always on the understanding that we would probably only ever need to use it for between 4, 5 or 6 patients in any given year. Looking at the previous 2 years,
that out of 1,000 patients.
Looking at the previous 2 years' trends of when we felt we would have recommended the use of the safe holding device if we'd have had it.
Yeah.
And we used it for the first time in January of this year. So we only got it ratified for use in December, and we used it for the first time in January. Following all the protocols, everything was followed. And it was very much that patient group that I've said, head injury, young, male, known potentially sort of the family members let us know that he might be a bit challenging on waking up anyway.
Yeah.
So if you like, that's predictable unpredictability. So we were starting to line the ducks up, thinking, okay, this could be one such situation now.
Yes.
And an initial trial weaning off sedation was tried to just try and get some kind of measurement for how he would be.
Okay.
And I think it was clear from that initial moment that this is going to be one that we definitely needed to use the system for. So the consultant prescribed it, and we applied the system when the patient was still sedated. So obviously the thing about this system is, for us, the patient would always be calm.
Yes.
Before we tried to apply it, because we're doing it in ICU, and then we weaned him off his sedation, etc. And he wore that safe holding system for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And in the 24 hours he wore it, no other staff members got hurt, and he didn't try to pull out any of his indwelling devices, of which at least one of them was a life-preserving device, and the others were safety critical, without a shadow of a doubt. He would have caused himself significant injury and harm had he have managed to pull them out, which is what he was trying to do.
Right.
And it was amazing. His recovery, it was incredible, Doug. He actually recovered. We could take the holding system off after 24 hours, at about the 24-hour mark. And we'd slackened it off in between.
Of course,
of course we did. We'd reduced the level of tension on it in between, and tightened it up a little bit. Obviously, doing all of our regular observations and checks as we should be, and reviewing twice a day the appropriateness and the proportionality of it, which we should be doing as part of our protocol.
Right.
And I can remember I've really had my eyes on this patient and on everything, because it was the first time we were using it.
Yeah.
And I remember going down on the 3rd day just to see how the patient was doing.
Okay.
And I went up to the cubicle and I looked around. I said, "Thomas, where's the patient? Where's the patient?" "Oh, he's walking around." I said, "He's walking around?" And it was like, "Oh yeah, he's made a fantastic recovery. He's walking around." And I was absolutely, I couldn't believe it, Doug, because all of the patients that we looked at in the previous 2 years that would have qualified, we think, or would have required the safe holding system that we would have prescribed it for.
Yeah.
Their recovery was so long, it was taking between 2 to 3 weeks, because we were having to keep resedating them, all of the manual or the hands-on restraint, the manual restraint, the resedating. We could never properly assess their neurological function. The patient was hurting themselves, and staff were getting injured as well. This was unbelievable.
That's great.
It was fantastic. So in many respects, and I've been thinking about it, I think that using that safe holding system on that patient has actually completely aided his recovery process. It's sped it up.
Excellent. It's got to be part of the pathway to recovery. Like as you said there, one of the things I did pick up on, and it's almost like you're firefighting, because if they're not aiding their recovery and causing further injuries, you sort of forget about the pathway to recovery, and you think we just got to keep this person alive.
Yeah,
I know that's what was reiterated to me.
exactly. And it's almost like in the past with that patient group, we were on a continual daily cycle of just going around the same cycle.
Yes.
Wake him up, restrain him, he goes back to sleep, wake him up, restrain him. And it was just this endless cycle. It's a bit like that giant snowball coming down the side of the hill. You need to put a stake in it before it gets bigger and bigger and turns into an avalanche, don't you?
Yeah, of course.
And this feels very much like with that patient, we absolutely managed to do it. And I sent, well, actually, with the help of the clinical educators for ICU, we sent out a little survey to all the staff that were involved in the care of that particular patient.
Oh, great.
Yeah, to just ask them, how do you think this helped? Do you think this minimised patient injury, staff injury? What were the fors? What were the against? And it was so positive, the feedback we got. And unquestionably, and including the consultant concerned, there was the lead consultant all the way through helping us try to get the safe holding system ratified and approved. Undoubtedly, they genuinely believe, as do I, that this really has helped with not only minimising the patient's injury and staff's injury, but actually speeding up his recovery.
Great. See, that's good. I wonder, it'd be interesting to see what their thoughts were beforehand, because I remember when we did some of the initial trainings with some of the groups, there was resistance, and it's good to have resistance, because I think anyone who's too accepting of very restrictive measures in any clinical environment need to have a look at sort of why they're not scrutinising things. You should be scrutinising over sedation, seclusion, prolonged restraint, and the use of some form of soft restraints. And as much as my job is training people as how to use the kit, I mean, let's face it, when you've done it a few times, it's actually quite easy. It's much easier with manuals and with videos, but most of my job is changing people's minds. I have to come in and face sort of people's questions and answer them in a constructive way that's not too defensive, so they don't think it's kind of a sales pitch. And then for me, the proof's in the pudding when they actually try it and they get to use it in a life-threatening situation.
It's really, and I told you it took about a year, really, about 9 months at least.
That's good going.
Fact, if we say it took 2 years from the moment the penny dropped that we might need some kind of mechanical restraint to getting the safe holding, to identifying that system and then getting it in. If you think about where the trust started from, we were quite late in setting up a service around supporting staff to understand restraint, the risks of restraint, and the techniques of restraint, and how
which isn't a criticism, because if there aren't major problems, it's not top of the priority list, is it?
Well, what I would say is, I think in a trust of our size and complexity, there are many competing problems.
Yes.
And I think it was just needing somebody, to kind of drive that agenda forward. Which I never intended it to be me when I became an operating department practitioner or clinical educator for pediatrics. It was kind of just like a sideline that I then became interested in. Yes. But for the reasons of living it by experience, of having to manage these patients, in these very challenging situations, and feeling very empathetic towards both patient and staff, if we're going to have to do this, we need to minimize it, try and manage it, and if we have to do it, let's do it right. Let's do it the right way, and let's try and learn from it as well if we can, and close that loop. But to try and get the safe holding system into a trust that even until April 2018 didn't actually have a physical intervention service.
No.
I'm amazed really that we did get so many people on board with it and engaged with it. So, and it was Safeguarding engaged in that process as well, because they could see the potential benefits of using it. It's probably more proportionate and less restrictive than 3 weeks of hands-on, hands-off physical and chemical restraint, you know,
Yeah, that's right.
for these particular patient groups. And it's a different mindset. And to a trust who was probably very much in its infancy about understanding restraint and acknowledging restraint in the first place, we did have to go through an awful lot of governance. But then that's not a bad thing, is it? I think that's a good
Not at
thing.
all. No,
Yeah.
I have to thank you, Sophie, because it's so important that people get the right people there for me to speak to. Because I've just looked at my calendar, and there's a couple of other places I've visited, and I always look at them and I think, wait, what happened to that lead, or where did he go? Now, sometimes it might be that the patient that they were having the initial meeting about has moved on, so they've not got that level of risk presented anymore, or it might be that they found another solution to it. But often I think it's because the right people aren't there. Safeguarding have got to be involved, health and safety, governance, even manual handling, because it's a manual handling activity.
Actually, we did include manual handling. Yeah, so this is what I mean. It doesn't just impact on one, even infection control. You know, how do we wash these devices?
That's right, yeah.
Do we or don't we? Or do we make them single use? Because we don't have facility for washing machines like some homes would, for example, or schools that might use the device.
Yes.
So we have to think about it again from a very different perspective. So it wasn't just a case of, oh, let's get this sorted, let's get it in, it's great. There was so much we had to go through to make sure everything was lined up. And I think it was really important that I would never, ever advocate anybody buy this device without the follow-up training from yourselves.
No, that's right.
And for us, I think critical to us is that we have that annual refresher on that device. You know, I just think that's a really important part of the governance process and the audit process.
Yeah. Well, if people call up, we don't sell it unless they can evidence training. And overseas, we've had to bend things a little bit. What we often say is, look, why don't you use our resources, and why don't you sort of take a franchise almost for your correctional facility or for your hospital, and then the trainers come out to us. We had Jimmy who's come over from the prison service in Amsterdam, and he's taken the training system back there. We've got a few other franchises, one in India as well. But for me, it's the continuity as well, because after you've done it for 1 year, if those trainers can keep updated, they're ahead of changes, because we do make changes. We get feedback from our clients on which techniques are effective and which aren't. We have a regular medical review every year where different doctors will look at it, and things do change. I mean, it's the same as physical intervention. Physical intervention changes, doesn't it?
Well, this is why, you know, this is why we have annual refreshers on physical interventions, and the safe holding system is no different, as far as I can see. Because it's not just about you getting updates on any changes or any issues that have been reported by other people using it. So that's part of the education process and learning. It's actually, hang on a minute, if we're only applying this to 4 patients in a year, I might not have been one of those people that were applying it, so I can't actually remember. So can I have a little bit of a refresh?
Yes, that's right.
And I think that's really important, isn't it? And also, you effectively taught us to teach staff the end user, so really you gave us train the trainer training in effect. Yeah. But if we don't get refreshed by yourselves every year, how do we know we haven't then changed something unintentionally? Yeah. Now we're teaching it in a slightly skewed way because we haven't had a refresher on it, and we think that that's normal. And then things get changed, don't they, over a period of time? And suddenly we're not actually doing the actual training that we were taught to teach in the first place, but something completely different.
Exactly.
And I think it safeguards against that for sure. And I think with this device, I think as many safeguards as we can have in place, which is why we've got such a strict protocol on how to use it and when to use it and who can authorize that. But as I said, it is consultant prescribed, but there may be an occasion when it has to be escalated up really, really quickly before the consultant can make that decision, or it can be contacted. Yeah. And in this particular instance, I was called first to advise on this particular patient. And I advised that we use the safe holding system, but that we immediately... I did. But I was very conscious that we were going outside of that consultant prescribed. But as soon as we practically could, got hold of the consultant to prescribe and concur. But it was like, it's like your dynamic risk assessment, isn't it? You're weighing it up, you're balancing. And I also knew that the people that would be applying that were all the clinical educators, or mainly the staff that you had trained. So they were the trainers in that device.
Yes.
And they made sure that all the protocols were followed, and very, very quickly the consultant did prescribe it. And we followed all of our systems and processes, and all the checks were put in, and the patient monitoring. And I'm very happy that we followed everything that we should have done.
That's great. It's always great to hear a success story. So what have you got on for the rest of the day, Sophie? Back to work?
Yeah, well, I'm sitting in my car in the car park at work, because it's the only place, A, I can get a signal, and B, I knew that I wouldn't be disturbed, because
well, as long as the helicopter doesn't come in, because I know your car park's got that helipad.
Yeah, I'm on the opposite side of the hospital to where the helicopters are, so
tactical.
hopefully we won't hear any. I haven't heard any going over. Basically, I'm going to go back now and answer a few incidents that have come in over the weekend. And visit a particular ward that has a couple of challenging patients, so I need to look at that. And also design some training for one particular area where they've got some challenging behaviours and a lot of new staff that haven't had any training. So we're going to do like one of these interim 4-hour sessions that I mentioned to you. We'll do a few of those for them. So to be honest, every day is busy. We're just really busy with challenging patients and trying to de-escalate or resolve. And advise, really, and sporadic teaching where appropriate, really.
Excellent. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for your time. And, well, it won't be long for it's our refresher on. I'll be coming to see you again.
It won't be, Doug. It's in November. I've already checked that out. Okay, take care.
All the best. Thanks, Sophie. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.